In this video, I'll show you how to install 3CX Recording Manager and go over some of the basic functions of the application. As we go through this install, we should probably talk about a couple of prerequisites that need to be handled before running the install. First, you'll want to install Microsoft SQL Server. Version 2005 and up is fine. The Express version from Microsoft is free, and that works fine too. Also, you'll want to create a blank database in SQL Server to store all of the data needed in Recording Manager. Finally, you'll want to install Internet Information Server, which is part of Windows and also free. In this first phase of the install, we're creating the web portal, copying over all of the necessary files, creating shortcuts, and basically installing the application. Following this step, we'll want to authenticate the license key and configure connections to SQL Server, 3CX Server, and your mail server if needed. Putting in your registration information is actually kind of important. You'll notice there's some red dots here indicating required fields. We ask for this registration information so that if you were to lose your license key sometime in the future, we'd be able to identify who you are and your license key. So this really is important information, and it'll also give us the ability to contact you if there's new releases of the product. So click on the registration key, and that goes out to our web server and authenticates your license key. The next step is to connect to SQL Server. You're going to want to select the SQL instance that you created when you installed SQL Server. You'll see that we have quite a number of SQL Server instances in our environment. And you can select either Windows authentication or SQL Server authentication. Either one will work just fine. And then don't forget to select the database that you created prior to the install. Quick test to make sure that the connection is working well, and we're on to 3CX. Oh, there's another step that we need to do. Once you've created the connection to SQL Server, you'll want to create the necessary tables, users, logins that are necessary for SQL Server. And I should point out a couple of settings here. 3CX Recording Manager has a retention policy that you can configure. The retention policy automatically deletes old recordings that are older than the date specified. This particular setting tells 3CX Recording Manager to delete any records in SQL Server if a retention policy has been specified. And this option allows you to import existing recordings. The next step is to connect to 3CX, and because we're installing on the same server as 3CX, this button is able to go out and to extract authentication information to connect to 3CX. In a call center environment, you may want to specify a manager by putting in their extension number and the extension group name. By specifying a manager of the call center, this manager is able to see all of the recordings for all of the members of the extension group called call center. You can call the group anything you want. It just has to be an existing group in 3CX. If you want to have recordings forwarded to an email address, you'll need to specify connections to your email server. Your mail server may require authentication, or you may need to configure your mail server to allow relay. There's a number of things that you might have to do in order for this to work. But I wanted to talk just briefly about this email. It's very handy to have an email in here for this test button so that we can confirm that we've connected successfully to our mail server. But it also serves another purpose. If you want all of your recordings to be forwarded to a single email address or distribution group, then you'd want to put in that email address here. If you want recordings to be forwarded to the individual extensions that are making the recordings, then you'd leave this field blank. Finally, this is where you create the retention policy. You can tell 3CX Recording Manager to delete recordings after having forwarded them as an email, or you can also specify a retention policy that says delete all recordings that are older than 365 days, for example, for a year, for example. And that's pretty much it. Don't forget to press the Save button to save your settings. And then you can click on the Start button to start the Windows service that monitors for recordings, and that's it. When you run the install, it'll create a couple of icons for you. One of them you've seen already. This application is the application we were just in for configuring 3CX Recording Manager. And then the other one here is for access to the web portal. The first time that you start Internet Information Server and this application, it may take a minute for it to come up because Internet Information Server is having to compile the application. But you log in with your regular 3CX extension and PIN number. And you'll see here that we already have a couple of recordings in the database. You can play a recording by clicking on this icon. You can delete recordings by clicking on the red X. You can filter to search for an individual recording by putting in filter information. So for example, if I just put in the letter O, it'll filter out all of the recordings except for those that have a caller name that starts with the letter O. To remove the filter, you simply press the red X there. If you need a more complex filter, you can click on the Create Filter option, and it'll bring up a fully functional query manager. So for example, you could say, give me any recordings that are between 2 dates. So we can select a date in the past, date in the future, and let's add criteria for the extension is equal to 100. And you'll see that we have this one record. Again, to delete the filter, just press the X. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, 3CX Recording Manager, how to install, and some of the basic features. I hope you found this helpful.